What's up, guys? This is Dave from The Disorderly. I'm joined by our good friend, Damon Martin from nerdcoremovement.com, one of our favorite sites. And we're going to talk about the Solo, a Star Wars story. Both huge Star Wars fans, and both, I don't know about you, but I had little to no expectations of this going in, and I was not surprised. And I felt I came out the other end better for it.
Yeah, I would say I had low expectations going into this thing, just because, the reshoots and the change of directors and everything that happened, and I came out pleasantly surprised. We'll get deeper into it, of course. I mean, I wouldn't put it on the same pantheon as, Empire Strikes Back or the original Star Wars, but I thought it was, an enjoyable movie.
Yeah, because, our fans, when Volpe and I do our kind of movie review podcast, little episodes, Nick mostly is doing the Westworld stuff, and we'll do some stuff with Nick here and there. He's handling a lot of the Westworld. Volpe and I are grabbing, we're going to any of the big movies and trying to recap, and we always kind of comment that, Damon, is he is like, you're the Obi-Wan Kenobi to my Vader, where you will find the good in almost any movie. And I mean that in the best way possible, where I tend to be very pessimistic and like glass half full. And you typically will find kind of the silver lining behind things and keep it pretty positive for the most part. And I noticed that I think your review for Deadpool, your headline was like, not as good as the first one. And I was like, whoa, man, Damon didn't dig it. And then I saw your headline for Solo, where it was like, loved it, but definitely some problems. And I'm like, oh, man, Damon is starting to turn, man. He's starting to join and come over to my side, you know what I mean? So I'm kind of I'm fascinated by kind of your...
I'll tell you this, because you had me on your podcast after The Last Jedi came out, and I was very defensive of Last Jedi. And then I went back and rewatched it again because, listen, Star Wars to me has a different place in my heart than any other fandom, and I would say I'm actually a bigger comic book fan than I am a Star Wars fan today, where I'm at in my age now. Like, I've seen Avengers Infinity War 4 times in the theater. I obviously love that movie, and that, the Infinity Gauntlet comic book series was one of the first, crossover event series I can remember being excited about as a kid when it came out in the early 90s. But Star Wars always holds a special place in my heart because the first movie I can remember seeing in a theater, which is dating me right now, is seeing Return of the Jedi. I always remember that. I was playing my toys, and I was with my buddy, and my parents took us to go see it, and I remember that. I'm sure I saw movies before that, but that's the one I remember seeing when I was a kid, was Return of the Jedi in the theater. I saw it in the theater when it came out, and so Star Wars has always held a special place in my heart, and so maybe I'm not as critical about Star Wars as I should be, because there's a certain nostalgia that goes along with Star Wars where I'm always going to love it no matter what. And it took me some time, but like Rogue One, I loved Rogue One when I first saw it, and I saw it again. I love what they did with that movie. The Last Jedi, though, I saw it, and when I saw it, I was like, yeah, I love what they did with it. I enjoyed this, and I defended that, and I defended this, and I defended that. Upon a second viewing, and after hearing Kevin Smith, who is one of my idols, kind of break down the movie where he actually had problems with it, which is kind of like you hearing me have problems with it. I went back and rewatched it, and now I've kind of turned the circle. I've kind of come to the point where I really don't like The Last Jedi.
Yeah, no, I mean, and I think we commented and joked about this where, excuse me, it is a gift and a curse that I have pretty much an unwavering, immediate take on whatever I'm seeing. And I have not liked Force Awakens. I have not liked Last Jedi. And I remember us talking about this where, because you were kind of playing it was great, added moments, and all, and I was just miserable. Absolutely just miserable. And then I always, it just, you slowly kind of get the people to come, yeah, you know what, kind of, yeah, it does have some problems, the Cinema Sins videos come out, the Honest trailers come out, and you start thinking like, yeah, you know what? Yeah, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Or why do they do that? And it's a weird thing because, I immediately hated it. Immediately. I don't think I saw it twice in a movie theater. You know what I mean? Which is brutal for a Star Wars movie for myself to not see it at least twice in a movie theater. I knew what it was to me immediately. And I don't even get that 24 hours of just glee of seeing a new Star Wars film. You know what I mean? If it's just not great, and it's a gift and a curse, as I say, you know?
Did you like Rogue One?
I liked it fine because I think it really just didn't really kind of, to me it was just, oh cool, I get a free Star Wars movie, you know what I mean, that I don't have to wait 3, 4, 10 years for or whatever. Yeah, I'm just getting a cool Star Wars movie that's going to explain something that, was mentioned briefly, and it sounds great. I kind of enjoy those movies in a compartmentalized vacuum where, you really can't, unless you just start throwing out some crazy stuff, you can kind of not really upset me. It's when you kind of get into the Skywalker saga and that stuff that you start just making some wild swings that I get really upset and disappointed for the most part. I don't get mad. I just get disappointed. You know what I mean? Like your dad.
I'll still fiercely defend Force Awakens because I really did enjoy that movie. And I think it was a great setup and a great kind of reintroduction to the series after being gone for 30 years. Like, I understand everyone's biggest complaint with that movie was it's basically a carbon copy of the first one. But in a way, I like that now that I look back on it, because in a way it was kind of like reintroducing to a new audience. Because as big as Star Wars is, there are still people out there who have not seen Star Wars, or they're just now getting into the series, their kids or their teenagers. And so, not everyone is attached to Star Wars the way that I am and probably the way you are. So I have to kind of take a step back. And so I still really appreciate what Force Awakens was, and I still really enjoy that movie, and I enjoy what it set up for the future. But it took me a little while after seeing Last Jedi and hearing some other complaints and kind of coming down from the high of seeing a new Star Wars movie to where it really started to settle in on what I didn't like about that movie. And then over time, I actually grew to really dislike it because I never went back and saw it again in the theater. Just like you, I've seen Avengers 4 times. I saw Force Awakens, I think, 5 times in the theater because I need at least 2 times just to understand it, because I was so excited on that first time where I was just like, oh my God, we're seeing Star Wars again for the first time in 30 years. So I was just over the moon excited, to see a Star Wars movie that wasn't a crappy prequel. And so it took me a little bit. Last Jedi, I just never felt that. Even after we talked and I was defending the movie, a week and a half later, my girlfriend asked me, she's like, do you want to go see Last Jedi again? I was like, we'll see it on Blu-ray. And I knew it, that was the moment when I was like, hold on now, I'm not excited to see Star Wars again. That should tell me right there it's not as good. When I saw Rogue One, I had very low expectations. I went back and saw it again a week later because I was like, oh my God, this is way better than I thought it was going to be. And it was awesome. It was great, and I wanted to see it again. I never had that feeling with Last Jedi, and so it kind of took me a little time to kind of come off the high of Star Wars to kind of realize it was just not a good movie.
Right. And, I kind of want to touch on it a little bit, but, and just to kind of, these aren't really spoilers. These are well-known things, and we'll kind of get into spoiler territory, but I kind of want to touch on the box office and get your take, because it tracked super low kind of for, the embarrassment of riches that is Marvel Studios and Disney and the mouse and everything. But to have a Star Wars movie, its 4-day be about $100 million. Pretty surprised. I don't know. How do you feel? I mean, Justice League's 3-day was 93.8. Solo's 3-day was 83.3. And Rogue One's 3-day was 153 or 155, something like that. So, I mean, were you shocked to kind of see those numbers?
Well, a bit, and I do have a bit of an explanation why that is, in my opinion. One, I think that they're still competing with the Avengers and Deadpool. I know Deadpool dropped 66% from week 1 to week 2, but that's pretty common. I mean, that's almost every movie drops 50 to 60%, especially blockbuster movies. I mean, I think Avengers dropped dramatically like that, and it's now the 4th biggest movie of all time. So that's to be expected. But Deadpool is still a movie, and much like when the first one came out, the people don't necessarily run to see Deadpool. I mean, they ran to see this one more, but still, you're getting a lot of stragglers going to see Deadpool right now, and there's still people going to see Avengers right now. And I think that's part of the problem with Solo is it's coming out right after two really highly anticipated blockbusters that you kind of figured everyone was going to love. Like everyone, I think it would have taken a lot for the Avengers movie to suck. And I think everyone knew Deadpool for all the faults that movie had, and it did have some faults. It was still hilarious. It still felt like Deadpool. Like it didn't, they didn't screw that up. There's certain things I didn't like about it, but ultimately I still laughed. It was still a fun movie, and it still felt like a Deadpool movie. And then I think the third factor, the kind of combined third factor is I think a lot of people were worried about this movie because of the reshoots and the change of directors, and everything is so public now because a lot of this stuff happened in movies in the 80s and 70s where they had like a change of writers or a change of directors. But with the internet age and Twitter and Instagram and everything else that's out there, everyone knows everything. So when there's like a change of director, it's a big deal now because everyone's like, uh-oh, what's going on? Like, why did they, and they went in such an opposite direction from Chris Miller and Phil Lord, or Chris Lord, Phil Miller, whatever their names are, the guys who did the Lego movie, to go from them and saying it was going to be kind of a funny and kind of a, kind of a rambunctious movie, to Ron Howard, who, I like Ron Howard, but Ron Howard is a very vanilla director. Like, I wouldn't say there's not a Ron Howard style. You know what a Tarantino movie looks like. Ron Howard is Ron Howard. He's a good director, but he doesn't do anything that's going to blow you away. And so they replaced him with that, and then, I don't know, there was so much going on that I think people kind of had a bad idea going into this, and I think the other factor, or part B to that, when it comes to Star Wars is I think we're getting a little bit of Star Wars overload, because we went so long without Star Wars between the prequels and Force Awakens, but now we're getting a Star Wars movie every single year. And I'm not saying people are burned out, because people don't get burned out of Marvel movies. I mean, Black Panther, it was one of the biggest movies of all time, and then 2 months later, Avengers drops, and it's one of the biggest movies of all time. But while they are in the same universe, they are completely separate characters. I mean, Avengers is a blockbuster, and then you're going to have Ant-Man and the Wasp come out in July, and it's going to be a completely separate story, and it's going to do pretty good numbers. I'm sure that one won't do bonkers numbers, but it'll do good numbers. But Star Wars is kind of always centering around, right now anyway, is around the Skywalker saga in some way, shape, or form. Like, Han Solo is a character we know. Rogue One kind of tied back into Star Wars. Obviously, you got Star Wars The Last Jedi, and that was a very divisive movie. And I think there's a bit of the kind of the layover from The Last Jedi, where people were very critical of that movie, and it wasn't beloved like almost every other Star Wars movie. And then 5 months later, 6 months later, you get Solo, which had a lot of problems in production, a lot of problems with all the making of this movie, and I think it's a little bit of Star Wars hangover.
Yeah, it's interesting because I've thought about all these factors, and to me, I wonder if it's not a little bit too much like inside baseball with all the directorial changes, the behind-the-scenes stuff, because do you think, I don't know, I honestly, I don't know if your average moviegoer knows or cares about the ins and outs of how Ron Howard changed this and what footage was Lord Miller's versus what was Ron's. And I don't know. I feel like they're kind of clueless. Like, people are just going to go, oh, it's a Star Wars movie, we're going to go. And I think that's what hopefully Disney feels like, you know what I mean? So I don't know. I don't know how, we're marks. We read everything. We're looking at every headline, etc., but yeah, I don't know. I don't know how many people kind of went, ooh, I don't know, a directorial change? I'm not going to go see this Star Wars. Maybe I'll wait. I'll wait to hear how it goes. I don't know. I think it's more the fatigue or the competition or other factors. Maybe just kind of not being as interested in hearing weird origin stories that we don't really ask for. You know what I mean? I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I think, like, in terms of, like, my own intrigue, like, I just saw Mark Bernardin, who does Fat Man on Batman with Kevin Smith. I love him. And here's the thing about Mark. I disagree with him on things all the time. Like, he's not one of those guys. He's kind of like you and me, where, like, I love his stuff, but at the same time, we disagree on a lot of our feelings about movies. Like, he had problems with Avengers Infinity War that I didn't find a problem with. Like, I was like, I think you're being a little, like, you're nitpicking, you know what I mean? You're going a little too deep with that. But anyways, I don't agree with everything he says, but he just put out a tweet right before we got on this podcast. It's almost like eerie timing, where he said, do you remember the scene in Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade where River Phoenix, R.I.P., was in that movie, and they did like a little 15-minute vignette at the beginning where you see how Indy gets his hat and he gets the scar on his chin and all that stuff. It was like that little, remember that in Last Crusade, little 15-minute
absolutely.
thing? Yeah, and he didn't directly reference Solo, but he's basically saying that's all we need. Like, that's all the origin story we need for Indiana Jones. And in a way, he's right. Like, I did, and I know we're going to talk about Solo. That's the whole point of this conversation. I enjoyed Solo, but at the same time, I agree with him. Because did we really need, like, a backstory on Han Solo? I mean, his little, like, the little things he had thrown in through the movies where, you know, I made the Kessel Run in less than 12 parsecs. It was just kind of like a fun, kind of like, you know, little braggadocious thing that Han Solo said in one of the movies, and you kind of knew him to be a scoundrel and a, you know, a smuggler and that kind of stuff. I don't know that we really needed a Han Solo backstory. Like, there are other characters, like, they're talking about doing a Boba Fett movie now.
Right.
And him, I don't know if they're going to do a prequel or a sequel or how they're going to do it. I'm hoping to do a sequel where he gets out of the Sarlacc pit and we see what happens next. That would be my thing, because there's 30 years of history between there and Force Awakens where maybe we see what actually became of Boba Fett. I'd be interested in that. But even if it's an origin story where they do away with the whole crappy prequels, I'm more interested in that. The reason being is we don't know anything about Boba Fett outside of what George Lucas kind of shoehorned in to the prequels, which was terrible. We don't really know anything about that character. We don't know anything that motivates him. We don't know, you know, what was his biggest bounty he ever collected. Like, what got him to be such a famous bounty hunter. Like, I'm kind of interested in that because we don't know much about him. He was such a minor character. We know about Han Solo. He's been in every Star Wars movie up to The Last Jedi. Like, we know him. We know his character. I don't really know that we need an origin story for him. So I get it. And I kind of understand that, you know, that 15 minutes of River Phoenix is all we really needed for Indiana Jones. I kind of agree. I don't know that we needed a Solo movie.
Yeah, no, I kind of, you know, 2.5 hours into this movie, you're like, I don't really, you know, I mean, fun little things, and we'll go ahead and I'll give out the spoiler warning. We're going to talk about spoilers. It's going to be well distinguished. Yeah, you know, little things. How did you feel about the little, you know, and I think, you know, ranging from worst to best, probably for me would be how he got his name Solo. I thought that was pretty. I just was like, roll my eyes at that. And then my favorite thing would probably be how L3 was kind of incorporated into the ship. But, you know, how did you feel about how he got the gun and how he gets kind of the, you know, the shoot first reference they kind of throw in there? How did you feel about the little meeting Chewie and you know, all that stuff? How did you feel about all those little...
Well, the name thing was stupid. I'll just throw that out there. The name thing was really stupid. Meeting Chewie, I enjoyed that. That was kind of a cool little, you know, you kind of saw, you know, you knew it was going to happen, but it was kind of cool. I liked the meeting of Lando Calrissian. I liked that. And I liked the kind of conflict, that kind of weird friendship they built from the very part. That was one of my favorite parts of the movie, was how they kind of showed, because Lando and Han in Empire Strikes Back, they were friends, but they were still a little wary of each other. Like, Han was, you know, he's like, this is a guy I know, you know, we're friends. And then you had Lando kind of flirting with Leia. Like, that's just kind of the relationship they've always had, where they're friends, but they're also kind of wary of each other. I love that they kind of ingrained that into Solo. So that was probably my favorite part of all the little references, was the relationship between Lando and Han. They got that right. And it doesn't hurt that Donald Glover is amazing, you know, and he obviously is one of the highlights of the movie. So I like that. But then a lot of the other stuff, again, it kind of felt shoehorned in. That was what my review on Nerdcore Movement said. It felt like Han Solo's greatest hits, where it's like we have to shove in every single reference. Like, here's how he got his gun. Here's how he went on the Kessel Run. Here's how he shot first. And it's like, I get it. But that's also why we don't need a Han Solo origin story, because we know all these things. Like, we already knew all these things. Now we're just seeing them happen. Like, I don't really see a point of it. And so that's why I said it felt like what could have been at least a decent idea for a plot in the Solo movie kind of became Han Solo's greatest hits. Like, yes, I understand we all want a greatest hits album. I get it. We all have our favorite songs from our favorite bands, but occasionally you want to hear Pink Floyd Dark Side of the Moon from start to finish. Like, that album is not the same if you just pick out certain tracks and put them on a greatest hits album. Dark Side of the Moon is a classic. You want to listen to it from start to finish. And that's where I feel like Solo came up short, is because they did that. They're like, oh, Kessel Run. Oh, here's his gun. Here's how he met Chewie. Here's how he met Lando. Here's this. You know, it was a little bit too much of that.
It was a little bit. It was a lot. It was a lot of stuff that they just wanted to kind of jam in there. Yeah, I tend to agree with you, and I think one of my biggest gripes, and I haven't heard too many people complaining about this, but kind of the Disneyfication of the Kessel Run, right? So the spice mines of Kessel, basically it was a planet where they mined spice, which is a mind-altering drug, right? Okay, so the whole premise of the entire Kessel Run was basically Disneyfied into hyperfuel. Oh no, he was smuggling and now these smugglers are just smuggling hyperfuel. They're not smuggling drugs anymore. You know what I mean? And it kind of takes the teeth out of that whole, crime syndicate and the smuggling and all. You know what I mean? Like, can you have Disney do kind of badass gangsters and crime lords and stuff like that, or is this kind of another thing that Disney goes, well, how am I going to have an 8-year-old understand what the Kessel Run was for?
Yeah, I agree. And that's, like I said, I'm going to complain about a lot of things I didn't like about Solo, but I do want to preface everything by saying I still enjoyed the movie. I still had a good time at the theater. I'll go see it again, and I'll buy it on Blu-ray. And I want to say this, it's worth seeing. It is absolutely worth seeing. I wouldn't tell people to not go see Solo. It was a fun movie, but there were a lot of flaws in there, and that's another one. It's like you're absolutely right. Like the whole point of the Kessel Run, and like the way that they kind of made Han a family-friendly movie, a family-friendly character. When we first meet him in Star Wars, he's not a good guy. He's kind of a bad guy in a way, and he kind of redeems himself. Because through the whole movie, even when he's like all through the whole movie in Star Wars, his entire purpose is money. His entire purpose is when he meets Princess Leia, it's not love at first sight. It's all about money. It's all about collecting what he's owed. And then even at the end, after he delivers the princess and everything, he leaves. Yeah. He's like, I'm out of here. Like, screw you guys. I got my money. I'm gone. And then he obviously comes back and redeems himself, and he saves Luke, and he returns the Millennium Falcon, and that's when he kind of becomes the good guy of Han. But when you don't start, because that's the whole redemption of Han Solo in Star Wars, is how he kind of starts out as a bad guy, or not necessarily a good guy. I guess kind of an anti-hero,
sure,
where he's not necessarily a good guy. And he kind of turns things around at the end of the movie. If you kind of create in Solo where he's already a good guy, then when the hell did he go bad? Like, when the hell did he become this kind of scoundrel and drug smuggler? Like, when did that happen? Like, when did that supposedly happen if he's already kind of like this good, virtuous character in the prequel?
Yeah, I kind of agree with you, because literally Han Solo's a scumbag the entire first Star Wars, A New Hope, until the last, 2 minutes of the film, right? Just absolutely mercenary scumbag. He just sees them as, Luke and Obi-Wan as dollar signs that, then the princess is a big dollar sign. Remember, he doesn't want any part of the rescue operation until he realizes, oh, it's a princess. You know what I mean? So,
that's how they convince him when they're in the control room. He's like, I'm not doing this shit. Right. And Luke's she's a princess. She's worth
sounds like a suicide mine.
Yeah. He's like, she's worth a lot of money, and he's like, how much money? Like, that's how they convince him to even help.
Right. And then I don't know. I've heard some complaints kind of about the final act, the charitable act, and I can't remember the sum of money, but was it 66 million credits or something like that he just basically crowdfunds the round A funding of the Rebel Alliance, basically, by just turning it over to the crime pirates turned out to be the Island of Misfit at the end there.
Yeah, that was a problem, and also the amount bothered me, because if you remember in Star Wars, when he meets with Obi-Wan and Luke, he says he needs 10,000 credits up front. And then they say they'll give him 2,000 up front, they'll give him 15,000 more when they get to Alderaan. So 17,000 credits. So he went for that kind of a run. He gave up 66 million? Like, that's to the, I'm not saying, I'm not even saying, I have a problem with the 66. I'm saying make it a more comparable number, like 66,000. Like, okay.
Right. Well, no, exactly. Because, and I'm trying to remember the conversation. I've seen it a million times. But what was the number where doesn't Obi-Wan go, listen, we'll give you 20,000, and Luke's like, you could almost buy your own ship for that. You know what I mean? So that's so that's earmarking what the credits are worth, the value of the dollar, the value of the credit, right? And so we're to believe that he and Chewbacca basically go, oh, here's 66 million. you're gonna have. It just doesn't make a whole lot of sense. You know, I had a question about Lando for you. Do you think, and I don't know. I don't know if Lando kind of comes out to me as the king scumbag of this whole thing, in that, you know, he basically is winning at cards by cheating. You know what I mean? He's not like, outwitting these people. And how are you still alive, sir? You know what I mean? Doing the card up your sleeve gag. You know what I mean? Like, how are you still alive? And does it kind of, in your opinion, do you think it cheapens him as a character, that he basically is running around just basically cheating all these people at cards?
No, and but that's the thing. I think Lando is what Han should have been. Like, Han was not a good guy. Like, Lando was not a good guy. They were both kind of like bad guys. I mean, remember when we first meet Lando, like, he betrays his friend. Like, he turns him over to the Empire. Like, that's how little that's how little Han matters to Lando, is he's going to turn him in. And then once again, by the end of the movie, he redeems himself. He goes out there and tries to save Han. That's the entire point. Up to that point, they're both kind of bad guys. So Lando cheating at cards, and that scene, again, spoilers, but that scene when he's like, and I got all these men on the ship, and then he just takes off in the Millennium Falcon and just leaves them on the planet, which was hilarious, which is one of my favorite parts of the movie, when Lando just takes the ship and goes away. Like, that is Lando. Like, that's who he's a card shark. He's a smuggler. He's a pirate. Like, that was the whole kind of relationship they had. And Lando, I thought Lando was, like I said, I mean, again, I'm a Donald Glover mark, make no mistake. Like, I love Donald Glover. But he was the most accurate part of the movie, in my opinion.
Okay. Now, do you, I don't know where you fall on this, but, again, the videos, the debates are out. Do you think that last final scene where Han wipes him out fair and square, by stealing Lando's card, is that what Lando references in Empire? That you've got a lot of guts coming back here after what you pulled, that whole thing? You think he's referencing that, or do you think there's still years of shenanigans in between that are unfurrowed?
I think there's got to be more to it, because at this point, I mean, they're both still pretty young guys. I mean, let's just say in their 20s. This is supposed to take place, what they say, like 14 years before Star Wars? Is that what they said?
I think it was, don't quote me, but I thought it was closer to like 5 years before A New Hope or something. But I don't know, and that would seem not enough time. So it's either 5 or 15. I can't remember, but
I feel like it was at least 10 years. Let me just say, I think it was at least 10 years that I heard. But if that's the case, I think there's more to it, because again, as I said, I enjoyed this movie, but the other big problem I had with this movie was the timeline, where everything they were doing towards the end of that movie seemed like they're setting up a sequel, and that's fine. I'm fine if they did, 3 solo movies leading into it. I mean, if that's what they really want to do, I think there's other characters they could explore and stories that could be told, but that didn't seem to be the case when they started the movie. There was no, hey, we're going to do, a solo prequel series. I think they kind of set it up on the hopes of this would be successful and they could do a prequel, as opposed to just telling one self-contained story from Han's past and just being that, you know what I mean? And they kind of, it's like they left it open-ended where we have this sequel, because, this whole thing with Kira and Maul, which I'm sure we're going to talk about that in a minute, but like setting it up, and then, Han handing over like all that money basically to that like rogue little band of pirates, and they're going to start the rebellion. Like, it was just all too convenient for that to be the end, and there not to be a sequel. And again, this Han that we met in Solo is a fine character. It's just not the Han Solo we meet in Star Wars. So there's so much more that we didn't get to. So there's got to be more to the Lando story as well, because what eventually turned him into a pure smuggler, a pure guy who's driven and motivated by money. Like, none of that. They addressed all the little greatest hits things like Kessel Run, Chewbacca, Lando, Millennium Falcon. But what turned Han into the kind of money-hungry, pirate, whatever you want to call him, that we met in Star Wars? We didn't meet that character in this movie.
Right. No, I totally agree. And I don't know, and kind of speaking of Kira and Maul and the reveals and all that good stuff, how did you kind of overall feel about her character? Just, did you find her kind of interesting, dynamic, a little toothless? Did like shoehorned? Did you think she brought a lot to it? I mean, I don't know. I couldn't really nail down how I felt about her overall kind of presence. You know what I mean? Is she conditionally tied to? And we see that she ultimately kind of not really betrays, but kind of bails on Han to go back and do her crime syndicate thing. But that you could kind of never kind of nail down where she stood. Did you like that? Did it bother you?
No, I like that character, and I admit I'm a little biased because I like Emilia Clarke, obviously, from Game of Thrones. But I like that character, and honestly, as the movie moved forward, I was more interested in her than I was Han, because I want to know more about what happened to her in those 3 years. Because Han, we saw, he tried to join the Empire, he tried to become a pilot, he got booted out. He ended up hooking up with Woody Harrelson's character, and kind of that's how he got started into the quote-unquote life of crime, which was barely a life of crime as we turned out. With Kira, I was actually more intrigued because we saw her get left behind on that planet, and then we meet her again 3 years later, and she's kind of like the lieutenant to this giant crime lord. Like, I was kind of curious because she kept saying, I've done things that you'd never be able to forgive me for. I've done things that you never want to know about. I want to know what the hell that was. Like, it was intriguing enough to where I was like, I want to know. And the fact that at the end of the movie, she's the one that broke bad. Like, she's the one who abandoned Han and teamed up with Maul to, run this crime syndicate. She basically killed her boss. Her boss is dead. Now she's going to take his place. Like, immediately, I find her to be a more intriguing character because she did something unexpected in a way where I'm like, oh man, what happens with her next? And like, what's her backstory? More than even I was with Han, because again, we already know so much about him from the movies, and I didn't think that his portrayal in the movie, which by the way, I thought Alden Ehrenreich, is that how you pronounce it? I think he actually did a phenomenal job. I expected very little out of this guy, and I thought he did a great job stepping into an impossible situation, trying to play a character, iconic as Harrison Ford. I thought he actually did a pretty good job. I was actually pretty impressed by him, even because, again, none of the dialogue in the story is his fault. I thought he did, with the material, what he could do, and I thought he did a good job. But I was more intrigued by Kira because the things that we didn't learn about her, I'm kind of like, what happened in those 3 years? Like, what did she do? Like, what kind of evil, heinous things did she do? And now I'm more intrigued about, like, what she does next. So, yeah, I actually really like that character, and I like the intrigue. I kind of wish they had fleshed her out a little bit more, during the movie.
And, how do you feel kind of about the Maul reveal? I thought it was a little bit strange just because, again, I didn't think that they would really make that deep of a cut in the Disney age. You know what I mean? Because I don't know if your average viewer is up on the Star Wars Rebel canon of Clone Wars and Rebels and all the stages of Maul. And I think Maul even had like a straight to DVD, his own movie, right? That I think I own somewhere, you know what I mean? Where it explains like his craziness and mental state and the spider legs. And it's kind of a lot to unpack for someone who's like, oh, didn't I just watch him get sliced in half by Obi-Wan on cable like not too long ago? You know what I mean? So I thought it was a little bit strange, but kind of ties everything back to, if I remember correctly, I don't know if it was it Rebels or Clone Wars where the whole showdown with the Emperor was happening with Palpatine and all that stuff. I'm trying to remember.
The Maul reveal at the end was confusing for me because as big of a Star Wars fan as I am, I don't follow all the other canon. I don't watch Clone Wars, and I don't watch Rebels. I've heard good things, and it's one of those things on my wish list of things I want to watch eventually, but I'll be the first to admit I have not watched them. So when Maul popped on the screen, I was like, what the hell is this? Like, how did this happen? And then I went back and read the stories about who he was, and I kind of went back and I watched a couple episodes that he was in, on online and stuff. And so I was kind of like, okay, I was surprised they went deep cuts because I consider myself to be a pretty big Star Wars fan, and I had no clue that's what happened to him.
Right. Well, that's kind of my worry here. You know what I mean? With a lot of it was a very strange choice for me, but bold.
I enjoy it in that aspect because they went in a different direction than I would have expected. I think in that moment, if we had seen her talking to the Emperor or something like that, it would have almost been, almost like, oh man, like that's a kind of a tie-in to her being involved with the Empire. Using kind of a character that was made famous and then kind of fell off the map inside of one movie, because all the promotional material leading into Phantom Menace was around Darth Maul. And I remember the disappointment, amongst many disappointments of that movie, was him just getting chopped in half, and like that was the end of his character.
Well, it's the Captain of Phasma effect, you know what I mean? That they just kept rolling, you know?
I'm glad they went deep cuts because that was kind of enjoyable, but even for a guy like myself, who I consider myself to be a pretty hardcore Star Wars fan, I haven't watched those shows, so even I didn't know. Because immediately after leaving the movie, my first thought was, okay, my first thought, honestly, was this was happening during the Phantom Menace, kind of like while Maul was still alive, like before he got killed, and I was kind of thinking, how in the hell old are they saying Han Solo is? Because Anakin was a child, during that first movie, and that's when Darth Maul lived and died. Like, that was my first instinct, was to say, hold on, where the hell is this timeline at? And then afterwards I learned that, Maul had been alive, and he saved himself, and blah, blah, blah. But, like I said, I think it's going to confuse people more than they're going to get, excited. And they're going to have to go online and find out about this, because one thing that I've always enjoyed about the Marvel Cinematic Universe is that while they've always tied things together with characters and movies and things like that, they've kept it all pretty much involved in the movies. Like, yes,
right.
If you didn't see Thor Ragnarok, you're going to be a little confused at the start of Avengers Infinity War by not knowing the ship and things like that, but it's not going to throw you that far off, is my point. It's not going to be so out of left field where you're like, what the hell's going on? They've kind of kept that well. Even with Phil Coulson, who died in Avengers, his death was a major part of Avengers, and then they brought him back to life for Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., but they've never mentioned that in the movies. They've never even addressed that, because they know people aren't, judging by the ratings, people aren't really watching Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., so they didn't really want to reference that back to kind of confuse people. They just kind of let it go and didn't mention it, so they didn't kind of confuse people, and I think that's the mistake. As cool as it is, I think it's actually kind of cool they went that deep, but at the same time, it's kind of did you lose part of your audience? Because even I was lost in that moment where I was kind of hold on, isn't he dead? What's going on here? So,
and I know we've kind of talked about where it was announced late last week they're going to do the Mangold Boba Fett, which to me. Mangold, the director of Logan. I'm trying to remember what else he's done. It's literally director of Logan. Is basically his first name nowadays. So I'm trying to remember some of his other work, but
he's done. Actually, when I first wrote the story about him doing the Boba Fett movie, I had to kind of remind myself. So I was I knew his name from other things beyond, beyond just that. But yeah, he also did. He did Walk the Line, the Johnny Cash movie.
Right,
he did, 3:10 to Yuma, the remake, which is really good. So he did that movie. So he's done some other stuff like that. He did The Wolverine, the other somewhat palpable.
Was that the one in Japan, or was that the?
That's the Japan one. So he did that. So he's actually done a couple other movies besides that. He did that Night and Day movie. That movie with
Tom Cruise, Cameron Diaz.
He did Identity, which is actually, I think, is an underrated movie. That movie with John Cusack, the horror movie, that wasn't that bad. So, and he did Girl Interrupted, which is a pretty big movie. So,
all right, yeah. So he's got some credits out there. And the Boba Fett movie is coming, and we've talked about it a little bit. Do you kind of have any other kind of wild wish list items? I know people have talked about wanting a Jabba the Hutt Guillermo del Toro movie, which my head would explode, I think, if they announced that. Kicking around the Obi-Wan sounds like it's heating up. Do you have a lot of faith in these kind of standalone movies at this point? Or are you kind of shaking a little bit? Do you want to see more canonical kind of the Yoda story, the Obi-Wan story, the Boba Fett story? Do you want to see these stories, or do you want to see completely new, and Rian Johnson's got his whole thing that he's going to go do that's totally out of left field for things like that. But where do you want to see these kind of semi-annual, biannual, whatever it is, every other year standalones?
I think they got to mix it up, and because I do enjoy the prequel, whatever, the character-driven stories, because I really enjoyed Rogue One. I loved Rogue One. Solo, for all the things I've said about it that was a problem, I still enjoyed it. As I said, I would still recommend going to see it. It was still an enjoyable movie. And Boba Fett, as I said earlier, is kind of intriguing because it's a character we still don't really know much about, and I'm kind of forgetting the prequels. And I'm hoping Boba Fett is a sequel where we see him climb out of the Sarlacc pit and we see what he does next. Like, that would be my goal. But I'm fine with more origin stories. Like you said, I mean, you mentioned Jabba the Hutt with Guillermo del Toro. That immediately was like, holy crap. Like, I would go see that in a second. And there's other little, little side characters that I'd be interested in, or people that were kind of involved. I remember always when I was a kid, I always was kind of curious about some of the other characters involved in Star Wars that weren't Luke, Han, Leia, and Chewie, like that kind of stuff. Like, I would be interested in that. Like, I would, like a Lando movie, we already learned so much about Lando in this movie, but I wouldn't hate if they did a Lando movie about how he came to get Cloud City and how he, kind of did that. Like, I wouldn't mind that kind of a thing. But I'm also intrigued in other corners of the universe that doesn't always have to go back to the Empire and the Skywalker saga. Like, Rian Johnson has kind of lost favor with me a little bit when I really reviewed Last Jedi. But David Benioff and Dan Weiss, the guys who did Game of Thrones, they're doing their own corner of the Star Wars universe, and that I'm very intrigued by, because I am curious what they're going to do. Like, I'm kind of curious because that's going to be separate from the Star Wars Skywalker saga as well. And so I'm very curious about that. So it's a balancing act. I'm fine with the character-driven stories of characters we know and love. Like, there's enough mythology existing out there about Obi-Wan Kenobi that they can do a movie about him, and I think it would be pretty interesting because there's so many years between him going to Tatooine with Luke Skywalker and taking him to his Uncle Ben, and then obviously where we meet him in Star Wars, that I think there could be some interesting parts of that. Like, how did he become this reputation of this, like, hermit, and he kind of had this, like, mystique about him, and, like, there is enough story there where I think it could be an interesting movie, as long as they don't screw with the mythology too much. Boba Fett, again, we don't really know anything about him, and I think if they do a sequel to Return, because we had that 30-year gap between movies, like how he climbed out of the Sarlacc pit, and here's what happened to him, and blah, blah, blah. That's interesting enough for me to go watch it. And so if they can continue to find those kind of characters and do interesting stories, I'm fine with it. You just got to space it out. Like, after Solo, hopefully if they do a Boba Fett movie, it's not coming out to, like, 2021, like 3 years from now. I'd be fine with that. But we don't need one every other year, and I hope the ones they do every other year are not always going to be these kind of prequel, one kind of character movies. I hope they do start to explore other parts of the Star Wars universe.
And, kind of bringing it back to Solo a little bit, Aaron Erlich, as we try to pronounce his name, the lead playing Solo. He's admitted that, hey, I'm signed for 3 movies, so I'm under contract. No idea. I have no idea if they're going to make another one, a sequel. But he's like, listen, when I signed on for 3. Are you interested in another one of these with kind of the core group back?
I am if they do it the right way, because my biggest problems with Solo is like I said, they didn't make him kind of the scoundrel, the smuggler, the money-driven guy that he ended up being. And if the conflict of Kira, becoming leader of the crime syndicate is what somehow kind of, changes his moral paradigm, so to speak, if that's what changes, if he kind of loses faith in humanity a little bit, because the girl he loved, the girl he wanted to go back for, in all those 3 years he was away from her, turns and kind of breaks bad and becomes this, like, evil criminal, whatever, mastermind, and that's what kind of jades him and turns him into the Han Solo we meet in Star Wars, I'm fine with that. I'd watch it. There's enough story left over that I'd be curious what happens with that. But if they try to continue to make him this virtuous good guy that is not the Han Solo we know from Star Wars, then no, I don't want to see it. But if they're willing to go in that kind of darker direction, I'd be interested, because like I said, there's enough about that Kira storyline and finding out more about Darth Maul as like a criminal syndicate leader. There's enough there that I'd be curious to watch it.
All right. Just to kind of wrap up, do you have any kind of final thoughts on everything? I mean, we kind of touched on just about everything in my mind, but were there anything else that was sticking out to you that you wanted to talk about? Any favorites? Any things that bothered you? Any highlights? Lowlights?
I think I pretty much touched on everything that bothered me while trying to preface the fact that I still enjoyed the movie. But yeah, I mean, Alden Ehrenreich, he was great. I thought he did a great job. I thought he was really well done character. I really loved Donald Glover as Lando. I did enjoy Emilia Clarke as Kira. I did enjoy the twist with Maul, and I would like to see more of that if they're willing to explore that side. Like, hell, they could do a Maul movie, and I'd be interested. Like, how the hell did he climb out of the death pit of getting his body chopped in half and become a crime syndicate lord? Like, I would actually be interested in that movie, because that's something different. It's not something we've really seen them cover, in the Star Wars universe. So, yeah, it was a good movie. It was a fun popcorn movie. The plot wasn't that strong, and a lot of the greatest hits stuff, the Kessel Run, kind of stuff that kind of shoehorned in there to make it like, Han Solo's greatest hits, that bothered me. But again, overall, I enjoyed the movie, and if somebody said, would you go see it again? Yeah, I'd go see it again.
All right. Well, that's pretty good endorsement. So appreciate everyone listening, and hopefully you kind of take from the wisdom and the grandeur of our good buddy Damon Martin. So make sure to follow him on Twitter, and you're just at Damon Martin. Right, Damon? All right. And check out his website, Nerdcore Movement. Like it on Facebook. Subscribe. You work crazy hours. You work tirelessly. You do more TV recaps, movie recaps than I think anyone.
So I don't know how.
So I don't know how you do it. Like me and Nick are basically running the Disorderly, and we're trying basically do about half as much as you do by yourself. So we're in awe of you, and all you're able to do, and all your crazy recaps. So give this man a follow. Check him out. nerdcoremovement.com. You can find us at the Disorderly, Disorderly Media. Give us a like, give us a share, subscribe if you can. If you enjoy listening to portly men complain about superheroes and Star Wars and all that good stuff, we've got you covered. So appreciate you, and thanks so much.